Good evening. Tonight we are going to see the presentation of a two-year effort involving the town of East Longmeadow and the town of Hampden, based on a grant that we received from the Commonwealth to study our vulnerability to severe weather, and particularly flooding, which has been the main problem in Hampden through the years. We have our team here from Stein, Howard Stein Hudson, who have been doing the work here and also in Hampden, in East Longmeadow, for the past couple of years. And they're going to make the presentation of their findings. If you have comments or questions, they're welcome, but please come up to one of the microphones because we are going to record this meeting and we're going to post it on our website. Okay? With that, I'd like to introduce Steve Tyler, who was the head of the team from Howard Stein Hudson and was our consultant for the program. Steve?
Well, thank you very much. We are here.
Stand up, please, so
No, thank you.
No?
We're here tonight to go over the Hampden and East Longmeadow Infrastructure Assessment and Nature-Based Solutions Project funded by the Executive Office of Environmental and Energy Affairs.
Yeah, closer.
And go through our slideshow and describe basically what we've accomplished in this two-year effort and solicit feedback on the concepts that we are going to present tonight. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Taylor to go over the Zoom instructions for anyone that might be online joining us. And take it away, Taylor. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. So my name is Taylor Miller. I'm also with Howard Stein Hudson. I'm one of their community engagement specialists. And before we get started, we just wanted to go over the Zoom controls for anybody who is participating at home. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the Zoom toolbar. Oh, sorry. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Zoom toolbar. If you want to unmute yourself or mute yourself, you can click on the microphone icon. If you want to turn your camera on or off, you can click on the camera icon. To ask a question or share a comment, you can click on the chat icon. And to raise your hand, you can click on the hand icon. Today's presentation is going to be recorded. And if you could please leave your comments and questions till the end, we can get into them in more detail. All right.
Okay, and I'm Mary Monahan, and I was the public education coordinator for this project. So tonight's agenda includes learning more about this project. In the last 18 months, we've been working in the community, identifying and moving forward with your priorities and recommended solutions, next steps. So one of the big components of this project is public education and participation. So your presence here tonight and those on the Zoom call are all adding to that obligation that the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program asks of communities who gets this funding. So as noted, for the last 18 months, the Howard Stein Hudson team has been working with the town of Hampden, moving forward on priorities that the town previously identified as part of their MVP planning and continued to identify as this team got into the streets, got into the culverts, started looking at where these flooding opportunities to remediate are. We'll also discuss the next steps. These next steps have been determined, again, working with the town. This is your project. And then we'll conclude with questions and answers. So next.
How much are you the person that comes to my house on Main Street?
Several years ago, we did meet with you, yes.
And then you turn around and tell me, okay, we did the $30,000 assessment and we're gonna replace everything.
No.
No, oh, that's exactly what you told me.
Sir, can we wait till the
That's
presentation?
exactly what you told me, because I've been fighting the town of Hampden for the last 4 years.
Sir, can
address-
we wait until the presentation is
I'll
completed?
discuss with you
before
the
getting
next
into-
steps that occurred.
For you to lie about it on tape, that's a different story.
Okay.
I'm going home. I'll see you
Thank you.
tomorrow.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah,
My name is
you're
Stephen
welcome.
Tyler. I am a associate principal at Howard Stein Hudson. I manage our Worcester office. resident of Spencer until recently, and former highway superintendent in the town. So have dealt with similar issues this community has, small community, more problems than funding, and find that this is a helpful project for the community for planning to address these concerns. My role right now is to introduce the consultant team that's here with you tonight. From Howard Stein Hudson, you have myself, Stephen. Taylor is our public involvement specialist running our slide deck tonight. And Chris Lyman is one of our civil engineers. We'll go over the concepts that we presented. And we have Casey Arminetti with Landscape Interactions that was involved with the green infrastructure and low impact design concept that she will go over. And also want to mention working with Casey is her principal, Evan Abramson, that was unable to join us tonight. Other partners include our MVP regional coordinator. Is Andrew on the line this evening?
Let me check. No, he's not.
Andrew Smith, our MVP regional coordinator, is with the Executive Office of Environmental and Energy Affairs, and they were the ones that provided this grant to the two communities, and Mary will get into greater detail with that in the next slide. Other participants include your town administrator, Bob Markle, your highway superintendent, as well as the town of East Longmeadow, and Mass Audubon Laughing Brook, Bay State Roads, Graziano Gardens, who hosted one of our workshops, Girls of the Valley, Inc., participated in our student outreach at the DCR Holyoke Heritage State Park, Viola, who provides public work services in the city of Holyoke, and CM Wood, one of the vendors for a lot of the highway equipment that many of the municipalities use.
And Ted Zebert.
And Ted Zebert, excuse me. Thank you very much. And so turn it over to Mary to tell us about the grant.
Okay, so the town of Hampden and the town of East Longmeadow received a grant from the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program in order to advance priorities that the town of Hampden had previously identified in an earlier MVP planning workshop. And one of those priorities was to look at flooding, like what that gentleman talked about. He floods, his area floods. So part of this in the field work that the group has been doing with this grant was to look at how to remediate flooding on Main Street. You'll hear a little bit more about that later. So you're going to learn about the priorities that funded this program with respect to climate resiliency, climate change, and communities being able to set their own schedule and to set their own priorities. Governor Baker started this program about 10 years ago, and what's unique about it and what's a benefit to Hampden and all the other communities that participate is it's money that lets you decide as a community what's important to you. So you'll hear about that. You'll hear about what the town working with the team gave as the next steps moving forward. And you'll hear about the opportunities to continue to get more grant assistance through the MVP and other grant programs as a result of your prioritization. Right, next.
So for overview of the project and the activities that we've taken on over the past 2 years, this has been a 2-year grant project. We're winding down of the second of the 2 years. We first of all hosted a project information and public participation website. That's online now, and the website address is located on the materials on the desk where you came in, and also we will place it on the slide at the end, where you can go to and see all of the information being presented tonight, all of the work that we've done over the past 2 years, the reports and inspection reports and other research that goes in the background of all of this information. We had a student climate resiliency workshop that was at the DCR Holyoke Heritage Park. We also had a low impact development and best management practices workshops. One has been held in Graziano Gardens, the second to be scheduled, and may very well be a recorded presentation. That way it lasts a little longer and anyone can see it moving on into the future. In this community, we performed inspection and assessment of 32 culverts townwide that we identified at stream crossing locations and other priority locations identified by the community. And we also, as part of that investigation of those locations, we identified green infrastructure opportunities where either we could make water quality improvements or stormwater improvements to perhaps do one of two things or both things, treat the stormwater to remove pollutants, and also to slow it down a little bit before getting into the nearby stream or infiltrating some of it into the ground, which would also help alleviate flooding concerns. As the next step for that, we continued on with the development of pollinator garden concepts at 2 locations selected by the town. And we will also identify the top 10 locations for conceptual culvert designs, as well as additional green infrastructure and low impact design concepts. Ultimately, we are preparing the watershed assessment findings, and we are now in the public review and comment meeting. And the comments from tonight will go into the final resiliency study and the recommendations report. I'll turn it back over to Taylor to discuss in detail some of those activities.
Thanks, Steve. So as Steve mentioned, this project is largely built on public participation. So one of the things that we did right from the get-go was we created a project website, and the link is right up there, as well as on a few of the handouts that we have out there. So on the website, you can find the GIS maps that we created of the area. There was an interactive feedback map that folks could put comments into, add locations, and then we would incorporate that to the greatest extent possible. All of our project reports there, and you can read them and download them. And there are photos from different participation events that we had. There was a student climate resiliency workshop in April of 2022, and that took place at the Holyoke Heritage State Park, and it involved students from Hampton, East Longmeadow, Wilbraham, and Girls Inc. of the Valley. And that was a day full of hands-on workshops that included learning about climate change threats, resiliency strategies, environmental justice concerns, and the role of public works in protecting communities from those threats. Mary?
Okay, and the first of 2 of BMP LID plantings workshop was held this past May at Graziano Gardens. And I think those that showed up learned a lot, but what was unique about that day, it was a May scheduled date. The topic was climate change and climate resiliency. And if you recall, this past May, we had several days of over 100-degree temperatures. And that happened to be one of those days. So the original workshop was scheduled for outside on the pavement, and we had to move inside because of the heat, which was a reminder to all of us what the effects of climate change can be on what routines we have already established. So as noted, it was a great participation event inside, and we're in the process of planning one more workshop to discuss low impact development applications that home gardeners can use, the kind of plantings for pollinator plants. So Steve will tell you later, stay tuned. We'll be announcing that shortly.
So, hi everyone, my name is Chris Lyman. As Steve said, I'm a staff civil engineer at Howard Stein Hudson, and I was part of the project field inspection team here in Hampden, so you guys might have seen me around town a little bit last year, but I was also part of the team who assessed and prioritized all the culverts in East Longmeadow, or Hampden and East Longmeadow. When we first started with the town, they really focused on 2 main priorities they wanted to look at. The first one being roadway accessibility. So when you think of roadway accessibility, think of during severe storm weather when emergency services in town and DPW services really need to get to certain areas. We want to make sure they can get to those areas. So if you start having roadways that can flood, kind of like this one that the Hampden Police Department put up for Glendale Road, you really want to make sure that your infrastructure is up to the date for these more extreme weather phenomena we're having, so that emergency services and public works departments can get where they need to be to help the people they need. Another thing we really looked at was water quality here in Hampden. Working with the town, we looked at locations that could utilize green infrastructure in low impact developments within the town that would be overwhelmed by these ever increasing storm flows. We looked at places where we could potentially utilize green infrastructure to not only treat water before it reaches your waterways, but also infiltrate potential storm runoff so that it's a less of an impact to the system. Next slide. So through the previous MVP study, 32 culverts within the town of Hampden were looked at for further assessment. The 32 culvert locations were assessed using 4 main criteria. The first one being structural condition. So again, I said I was part of the inspection team that went out into the town of Hampden and inspected all 32 of these culverts. And what we did is we used this culvert assessment form here, which you can see to the right, and we were looking at things such as like the head wall of the culvert or the alignment of the culvert, basically the overall condition of the culvert. We looked at many aspects of each culvert. So that was one criteria we used for prioritizing culverts, was basically whether the culvert and different characteristics of the culvert were adequate, poor, or in critical condition. Another thing we looked at was flow constriction. So basically, to determine this, we looked at the existing width of the culvert, and then we compared it to the natural stream width that we saw there in person. So if you look at the bottom right-hand picture here, you can see a picture of kind of a smaller culvert. It's hard to see, but there's the pipe culvert there in the middle with the head wall. You can see it's much smaller than the stream coming into it. So basically, you get flow constriction, where if you get high precipitation, the flow, there's not enough room capacity for the flow to go through, and so either ends up flooding upstream from the culvert, or it can cause overtopping of the culvert, which then floods the roadway, which was an example of Glendale Road in that last slide. An example of a poor structural condition culvert is one on top here, which is located on Wilbraham Road. This is one where the outlet, the pipe of it had disconnected from the pipe itself. And so there's an example of kind of things we're looking for structural condition and things we're looking for flow constriction. You can see on the bottom picture. Another thing we looked at was impacted transportation services. So again, back to these emergency services part, we looked at where these culverts are located. Are they located on more local residential roads like Rockadundy Road, where maybe it's only affecting the residents of that area, but it's not affecting the large impact of the town? When we compare to like collectors or arterials like Glendale Road and Wilbraham Road, or even Main Street here in Hampden. So if these areas are cut off, are they only cutting off maybe the residential areas, which is still a problem, but it might not be as much of a problem as if it's cutting off like a major street like Main Street or Wilbraham Road, where you're trying to get to and from through the town. If you had flooding on Main Street, it almost cuts the town right in half. And the last thing we looked at was the Climate Resiliency Design Standard tool. So this is a preliminary tool that we used that really looks at how climate change might affect individual locations within the town. It looks at things such as sea level rise or river rise. It looks at areas of high precipitation and areas that maybe have extreme heat problems. So it could be areas that maybe have like a lot of shade cover, stuff like that. So it looks at stuff where they're at higher, now it's preliminary, but it looks at stuff where it might have higher potential of climate change affecting this area compared to other locations. Next slide. So from those 4 criteria, we looked at all the culverts. We came up with this top 10 list you can see here. We came up with a priority score, which you can see on the far right here. So when you're looking at the priority score, the lower the score, the higher the priority of the culvert is. And the reason for that is, so when we looked at like the roadway score, so a road like Rockadundy Road or a more local road got a score of like a 5, which means that it's not a high priority culvert because it's located on a more residential street, whereas Allen Street or Glendale Road, they got 3s and 4s because they're again have more traffic on them, they'll impact the town more. So the lower the score, the more the roadway is used by the public. So that's for roadway score. Then we looked at structural condition score, and I kind of talked about, we looked at different aspects of a culvert, whether those aspects like the head wall, the pipe itself were in adequate, poor, critical condition. So we had a whole bunch of attributes for a culvert, and we looked at every attribute. And from that, we determined each part of the culvert that got an adequate score. So say if the head wall was in adequate condition, it got a score, it got added a point. And from that, we came up with the structural condition score, which you can see under structural condition score, you can see like Wilbraham Road got a structural condition score of a 6, which was from that picture I showed in the last slide. Then we looked at a flow constriction score. So again, this is about talking about the actual width of the existing culvert compared to the stream that it's trying to carry. So certain culverts that had lower flow constriction, you have like East Long Meadow Road culvert or Rockadundy Road culvert, they got 1s because they had very high flow constriction, which means that the stream they're trying to carry, the body of water they're trying to carry was much wider than the actual culvert itself. From those 3 criteria, we came with our priority score, which then allowed us to come with our top 10 culverts. Should also be noted that this was not the only way we assessed culverts here in Hampden. A big part of, again, was working with the town to come up with what their priority list was. So I worked with the town. They kind of gave us like a top 7 list of flooding concern areas they had here in town. Some of them you can see here on the list, like North Main Street, Fisher Lane, was an area that doesn't actually have a culvert, but it was an area that the town had said was a high flooding concern area. So that's another way how certain culverts could make it on the top 10 list, was the town marked them down as a major priority. So from that top 10 list, we compiled culvert concepts. So here on the screen, you see the first 5 culvert concepts. When you're looking to give your public comment, each culvert has a number identifier. So you can see the first culvert here is called Hampden Culvert 001. So if you're trying to give a public comment on one of the culvert concepts, you can use that identification number and it'll at least tell us which culvert you're talking about. You can also give the street name, but there's some culverts that are on the same street. So some streets had like 2 culverts. So the identification number at least helps us narrow down to which culvert you're talking about. Next slide. And then here we have the other 5 concepts. These 10 concepts can also be seen on the boards behind us. So if you guys need a closer look, it might be hard to see them here on the screen, but if you need a closer look, you can see them on these after the meeting when we can look for public comments here in person. I'm just going to kind of go through a couple of the concepts that we created for the town based on what Mark had given us for existing conditions here in the town of Hampden. So this location's here at Glendale Road, which was a flooding concern area, and I'm going to give Mark a chance here to talk about the concerns the town has given to us for this location.
So, good evening, everybody. Mark Langoni, Highway Superintendent for the town of Hampden. Back in 2019, I personally experienced a flooding issue at this location. At the time, there was heavy thaw, warm temperatures, heavy thaw mixed with, in combination with a rainstorm. So that created an abundance of water trying to make its way through that little culvert there at the corner of Ridge Road and Glendale Road, at which point it just couldn't handle it and started to wash out Glendale Road just, what would that be? South of the culvert. We had to act quickly and shore up the edges of the road and really just hope for the best, because when you're watching something like that happen, there's not much you can do, even though you're there with loaders, dump trucks, material. So luckily, it didn't cause any damage to the road, a little bit of washout, but we did identify this as a main concern only because of my firsthand experience with this location.
Yeah, so as Mark had said, this was the location the town really had said and had pictures of flooding here in the town of Hampden. So what we did is we proposed to upsize the culvert a little bit here at this location. So the existing culvert is 114 inches wide, which is roughly 9.5 feet wide, by 72 inches high. So we're looking to propose an 11-foot wide culvert by a 7-foot high culvert, and we're doing it a little bit longer, 35 feet. This increase in length and width is to help with the flow constriction I was talking about before, to let more water pass through, but it's also to make it longer to help with bank stabilization, because as Mark had said, when it had been overflowed, it started washing away the side of the road. So this gives us more room to help with bank stabilization along the culvert. Another thing we have to kind of look at is when we're looking at the sizing of culverts, you just don't go to the biggest culvert, because you also have to worry about downstream flooding. So this culvert might have been providing upstream flooding right now because it's too small, but if you go too big, you have potential of washing out other infrastructure downstream along with other residents downstream, because these are areas that maybe haven't ever experienced this with water passing through them since they've been had residential streets put in them. So it's kind of a balancing act when you're looking at culverts. We want to upsize them, we want to help with the upstream flooding and the overtopping of the culvert. We also want to be careful that we're not making it too big, we're potentially flooding downstream people. It's also good to note these are just concepts. We're designing actual culverts, we have to follow the Massachusetts stream crossing standards. So when these culverts go into the actual design phase of them, they will follow that design standard, which takes some of that into account. Next culvert. So this is the location I talked about on Main Street at Fisher Lane. It's not a location that currently has a culvert in that location, but it was an area that the town had shown concern for flooding. I'm just going to kind of pass it over to Mark to talk a little bit about the Main Street flooding that historically has happened here in the town of Hampden.
So while I do not have any experience with Main Street flooding, I'm sure some of you may remember instances in the past, maybe 2 or 3 or 4, where a couple different sections of Main Street did flood. I have seen pictures and heard the stories. I do know that the same year in 2019, we were really taxing with that heavy thaw and rain all at the same time. Our bridges and culverts, especially on Main Street and with the Scannick River, was raging, and we were really at our limit as far as that goes. But I do have several concerns on Main Street, which may have several different solutions, but we are looking at them as, you know, possible culvert installations or upsizing. The other thing I want to add too is any location on Main Street, as Chris said earlier, could be a huge inconvenience to the residents of Hampden. Main Street is kind of like our main street. It's our thoroughfare that's traveled daily by residents and other, you know, residents from other towns passing through. This would, to have an event happen or a washout or to lose a road, would be detrimental to that travel, and also to getting emergency services out to, you know, the east side of town, from where our departments are located, police, fire, highway department. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you, Mark. So as Mark had said, there has been historical flooding along Main Street, which I'm sure some of you here have probably experienced in the past. At this specific location, again, it's not an actual culvert location, but it was an area where the town kind of brought up that they do have slope problems next to the Scannick River, where this is a location that currently doesn't have curbing there. So it's probably hard to see on this, but on the north side of Main Street is the only place where there's actual catch basins that are collecting stormwater drainage. On the south side of Main Street, all that water is just basically running off the roadway and then running down the bank into the Scannick River naturally. So I know in this area there recently was paving being done at this section of Main Street with, I think you guys had a utility maintenance project kind of going on here. I know they've been adding some curbing, so we're proposing to add catch basins on both sides of the roadway and curbing through it, because currently the, if you look here, there's a it says existing paved drainage well. That area is, the reason why that area is paved, because so much erosion from so much water draining to that single location is starting to eat away at the bank, and so Scannick River bank is starting to get closer and closer to Main Street. So we're proposing to put in a whole new drainage system here on Main Street in this section, to do away with just the water running off the south side of the roadway, and instead being redirected to a proposed pollinator rain garden treatment area. So this basically means it'll outlet, it'll be treated, and then it will run into the Scannick River, with some of that runoff being infiltrated by this wet garden here. Next slide, please.
Comment, the gentleman who was here and was unhappy lives at the first bend on the Scannick River, south of the, or west of the East Main Street Bridge. And at that bend, there's a serious undercut bank because of the force of the river. And clearly he's going to lose some of his property into the river because of the force of the river during flooding periods. So I mean, he's unhappy, but in some ways he'll make his point to me tomorrow, I'm sure, that something has to be done to prevent this from continuing. to undercut his land.
Thank you, Bob. Next slide. So not only did we look at culverts and assess them based on their condition, but we also looked at locations in Hampden along these culvert locations where we can put in green infrastructure and low impact developments. We looked at these low impact developments using five criteria including culvert locations that were located on public land or right of way that had room for these green infrastructure and low impact developments, areas that were within floodplains, and within 50 feet of wetlands or priority wildlife habitat. We also looked at locations that were within 100 feet of open space, and we looked at locations that were also priority culvert concept areas. So we wanted to show that you could use both green infrastructure and low impact developments along with hardscape. So not only are we going to replace culverts, but you can also replace these areas with green infrastructure, and they can work hand in hand with helping with the flooding concerns in these areas. From these criteria, we came up with the top 10 list for here in the town of Hampden. So basically for every criteria that one of these culvert areas met, we gave them a point. So some areas like the Glendale Road one met all 5 criteria, so it was a location that was high on our priority. But then there were some areas like Main Street on Fisher Lane, Mill Road, that maybe met a couple of these criteria, but they were still good areas. There's also 2 areas on this list that the town had told us were areas they wanted to use to be representatives to the community of how green infrastructure and low impact development can be used here in the town of Hampden. And that is Laughing Brook on Main Street and Memorial Park on Main Street. These 2 areas were chosen by the town for further concept development, which will be by landscape interactions, which will be talked about more by Casey in a couple of slides. But it really, not only were we looking at all 32 locations, we also were looking at those 2 locations the town had prioritized to us. Next slide. So we found 2 typical concepts that really worked here in the town of Hampden. The first one being vegetated water quality bioswales. Bioswales are really good in areas that don't have existing curbing or drainage systems. Basically, it's relying on the roadway to shed it from the crown of the road off the side of the roadway. The reason why vegetated water bioswales are good is because it collects the water as it on the side of the road once it drains off the roadway. It redirects it and treats it as it's being redirected to whatever stream, river, or body of water that it would be naturally be flowing to anyway. So it allows the bioswale to not only infiltrate some of that storm water, which is not allowing as much water going into the stream itself and making it swell its banks, but it's also treating the water as it comes off the road. So in the wintertime here, when we treat the road with salt, it's also allowing that salt to be treated that may run off the roadway before it reaches these streams and rivers. Another concept that worked really well in the town of Hampden was rain gardens and wet gardens treatment areas. These areas are really good for areas in the town that have existing curb line and have existing closed drainage systems. The reason why they're good for those areas is because they're good in areas that use closed drainage systems, and these areas can be put between, again, a river or a stream and the outlet of the drainage system before it reaches it. So if you have a water draining into the catch basins, it's going to outlet into the stream. If we put a treatment area between there, again, it can infiltrate some of that water runoff, and it can treat it before it reaches your waterways. Next slide. So here is the first 5 of the top 10 green infrastructure and low impact design concepts that we have here in the town. Just like the culverts, these also have the same culvert numbers that can be used. If you guys want to give public comment on them, you can be seen down here, like Hampden Culvert on the bottom right is Hampden Culvert 014. Just to give an example of what you're looking at, if you're seeing the concepts that have like kind of the blue, as you call them, like blue rectangular looking areas, those are areas that are good for bioswales. Then there's other areas that are using more of the, I guess, more rectangular greener areas. Those are water treatment areas that are being proposed. So those are the 2 differences. When you're looking at the concepts on the boards, or if you look at them, you can also get them on our website, which we talked about, if you want to get a closer look at them. Next slide. Here's our other top 5 green infrastructure and low impact development concepts. If you look at the 2 concepts here at the bottom right, these are the 2 locations I was talking about earlier where the town had prioritized them for further concept development by landscape interactions. The first one again being Hampden Laughing Brook. We're looking to add a green infrastructure and low impact development between Glendale Road, Main Street, and the parking lot of the Laughing Brook Sanctuary. There's a lot of open land there, and it's also an area, especially if you're looking at the Laughing Brook entrance to it, it's an area that you see a lot of standing water. So it's a good area, a low spot where we could put some sort of development there to help collect this water and treat it and infiltrate into the ground itself. Another area we looked at here is Hampden Memorial Park. It should be noted that this location has been commented on by the Parks Department, and this right now isn't the ideal location for this within Memorial Park, but it is the concept we're showing today. A lot of the ideas that are coming from this Memorial Park concept can be used at the new location we're looking at within the park. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Casey to go over from Landscape Interactions, kind of go over these two concepts she put together. Ooh,
That's not
you can go to the next one. Yeah, so these are two. You're good.
This is good?
Yep, we're good.
You can go to the landscape interactions slide. Here we go. Okay, thanks, Chris. So yeah, my name is Casey Arminetti. Speaking right into. Okay. How about now? Is that better? Okay. My name's Casey. I'm a designer with the company Landscape Interactions. Yeah, as we've said, our role here was to design low-impact stormwater management solutions for these two sites. On the left is Memorial Park, on the right is Laughing Brook. I'll just tell you right now, since I know you can't see the text up there, you're just missing out on our list of the pollinator species that our designs support. So there's about 9 native bees and 20 native butterflies listed there that the plants I'm going to talk about are directly going to serve as either pollen or nectar or host plants. And at the bottom, that small font are the different planting zones with specific plant species listed as an example of the different types of plant communities that could exist in the different colored areas on the plans. And please feel free to look at the board that's over there for a closer look. So with that, I'll just say, in both of the sites, we propose using naturalistic design elements to slow the flow of water, increase infiltration, improve the water quality, and address local flooding issues, of course. And the sort of backbone of our work as a company is always in expanding plant biodiversity, using a wider range of native plant species in each site. And the root systems of native plants do a better job generally of stabilizing soils than the sort of turf grasses or non-native grasses that are very common in lawns like at Memorial Park, or like the invasive bed grasses that are currently in the area where the basin we're proposing will be between the parking lot and the road at Laughing Brook. All of the plants, as I said, that we suggest are serving the purpose of creating habitat for native pollinators that were specifically identified as at risk in Hampden in this region. So this is a very specialized list of plants, something very different than you might find at a local nursery. So with that, I'll start with Memorial Park. We propose here a few different planting zones based primarily on soil moisture. And yeah, we focused on designing around the banks of the stream in the park to manage runoff from the steep rocky hills to the west, which currently causes flooding in the parking lot. And that, of course, was originally identified by the town as the area of need, but I will just reiterate, as Chris said, it's important to note these concepts that I'm going to suggest can be replicated in other areas, not only within the park, but in other areas of the town as well. So along the stream, though, right now, there's currently eroding slopes and turf grass, but we propose planting native vegetation with those more robust root systems and using landscape boulders to control erosion, slow the flow of the stream during storm events, and also provide recreational access and sort of, add to what's already a very lively park. Up at the top left there is a rendering of what this could look like. We were there in the summer. There were tons of kids playing in the stream, so we'd love to just make that area more aesthetic, more enjoyable to spend time there on a hot summer day. And then I'll go over to Laughing Brook on the right side. We propose creating a naturalistic basin in between the existing road with meandering channels, slopes, and berms. And it's designed to receive runoff through infrastructure connected to the drains that run along the curb of Glendale Road. So it will be receiving water through underground. Basin will be aesthetically beautiful and full of wildlife and new plant diversity. So there's also a great opportunity to extend the existing trail network of Laughing Brook Sanctuary into the new area with flood-resistant boardwalks and boulders. You can kind of get a sense of how interesting looking at that profile section in the bottom right corner. The design area will continue to the main entrance where new plantings and better layout could help improve clarity and the entrance experience of coming to the sanctuary. There's also currently some pretty intense potholes there that could be fixed. Across both sites, we designed 6 zones with distinct plant communities, and those are what you can go look at in better detail on our board. So every color here represents a different village of plants. So for example, the submerged edges along the stream could be planted with species that don't mind being wet all the time, like pickerel weed and in some places even lilies. But next, the floodable slopes in light blue here feature plants that could tolerate drought as our climate is moving more towards extremes. These plants would be okay with drought, but they would definitely get wet during flood times. So plants like jewelweed, which already exist along the bridge at Memorial Park, would be appropriate, as well as swamp milkweed, spotted Joe Pye weed, silky dogwood even. And then in light green, there are upland zones for shrubs and wildflowers and native grasses that would be in a more dry zone. And then specifically along the roads in yellow or along the parking lots, there will be plants that are salt tolerant. So they can, as Chris mentioned earlier, like these rain gardens or these swales, they can tolerate the salt, but also help to clean the water before it moves downstream. In the Laughing Brook design, we also have the opportunity to have a sort of dry channel, which is that purple sort of snake-like design that is where the water that would come in from the underground infrastructure that would hit those zones first. So something similar to the edges of the stream, but not wet all the time. So something like pussy willow or buttonbush would be appropriate for those zones. And then we also have a cool opportunity at Laughing Brook to create a bee and butterfly lawn in the existing picnic area. That's that big orange circle on the map on the right. So that would be a better habitat than the existing sort of monochromatic grass that's there. It would be better habitat, as I said, but also more easily maintained like the existing lawn. So that is a good opportunity. Theoretically, these plant communities can be applied to any similar areas across Hampden. The scalability and replicability of these designs is essential to our work, and we want anyone in the town to be able to use these lists to apply to similar areas in their own property. And with that, all of the plans in their final forms and the plant lists will be made publicly available through pamphlets that we're preparing for later on this spring. They'll also be available on our website, and of course you can check out the board that we brought tonight for sort of a preview of some of these designs. Thanks.
Thank you, Casey. So as Casey said, this is really our public comment period. We're looking at the public here in Hampden to comment not only on our 10 culvert locations, our 10 green structure and low impact development locations, but also the 2 locations that Casey was talking about. You can do that today in person by looking at the boards we have here in the back. And we have a form here on the right that can be picked up on that back desk where you can give your public comment here in person today. But you can also give public comment on the project website, which can be seen here up on the board. All of the concepts will be available there on the project website, along with a public forum for you to give comments on the 10 concepts for the culverts and for the green infrastructure locations.
Great job, everybody. So where do we go from here? To talk about next steps, Chris mentioned We are in the public comment period. This is going to continue through the end of March, March 31st. Your means for public comments are everything that Chris said. Just to reiterate, we have the form back there, which you can fill out today and hand to us. You can take it home, think about it. Put those comments on paper, either get them to us through the website, through email, through your town administrator. All of the information we're going to stay after the meeting and after the presentation, and answer any questions. You can get a closer look at these boards. You can also go online, which the website will provide. You can get a closer look at it, in your own time. We just ask that those comments be submitted by March 31st, where we move into the final reporting in May, and we were going to accumulate all of those comments and make appropriate adjustments to the reports. Following the final reporting, that will essentially conclude with the exception of the green infrastructure workshop, we'll conclude the activities of the MVP, and then it will be the town's next steps will include funding and looking for either local funds, grant opportunities, and pursuing those. The information that's gathered and formalized in this study are things that can be used in those grant applications. It shows that you've done due diligence, you've done the public outreach, you've identified your priorities, and your decisions are founded. And so it's certainly going to make a grant application stronger. There also would be local planning and permitting that goes along with those projects, and additional design development, taking some of our concepts and taking them to the next stage and implementing for construction. And then lastly, our last activity under the grant project is our upcoming green infrastructure low impact design workshop. We're still working on a date and location for that. And the other alternative we're considering is basically a virtual recorded workshop where it will be sitting on the town's website and accessible to anyone in perpetuity as long as it's maintained there. So with that said, we're going to wrap up the formal slideshow presentation and open it up to questions and discussion. On this slide right here, we'll leave on the screen that has the project website where all of this information can be found. And it has my contact information where you can email me directly, but certainly these other avenues are open to you through either town administrator or anyone here with us tonight on this side of the panel. So
Thank you, Steve.
for the time.
Yeah, the municipal vulnerability program is not going away. The way the Commonwealth typically provides grants is that you have a phase one where you develop a plan, and that's what we now have. And then following the plan and the acceptance by the Commonwealth, then you become eligible for grants to implement the changes that are recommended in the plan. So I think what we now stand to continue applying to the Commonwealth for funding so that we can implement not only changes in the hard infrastructure, but also that we can bring into play in town some of the so-called green infrastructure that will help absorb rainwater during severe storms and reduce, and ultimately we would hope prevent, serious damage and flooding in the town.
If I may, before we go to is there anyone online that might have a question?
So Andrew is not online, and we don't have any raised hands or questions at the moment.
Yep.
Very good. So any questions, comments, concerns? You want to stand up?
No, it wasn't. There has been, that I know of, no record or threat of flooding. To me, that looked like water, standing water on top of frozen ground. It was early February.
So just real quick to repeat the question for folks at home, because they were asking. The question is, a resident of Bennett Road asked why her culvert located at Bennett Road wasn't considered as part of the project.
So I'm not sure where on Bennett Road. You said 104? So I know we did assess a culvert on Bennett Road. It's actually one of our top 10 green infrastructure locations. I just have to make sure. I have to check if it is the one near 10. You said 104. Okay. Mhm. I know we did assess a culvert on Bennett Road. I just have to I would have to just confirm that it is the one by your house. I don't know if there's other culverts farther up on Bennett Road. 'Cause we definitely assessed one on Bennett Road. Yep. Yeah, I'll check. I'll check right now if we did. I know we did assess culvert on Bennett Road though. I'll look at it, and it was in our presentation today. The one I'm talking about on Bennett Road. It was assessed for one of our top culvert priority locations. I definitely understand. I'll definitely make sure I look at the one on Bennett Road, but there is one on Bennett Road that's on our top 10 culvert priority replacement locations. So, yep. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Connie had a comment. Is it on? Is it green? Push the button.
I have a couple of concerns. One is, last year, and you were at the selectmen's meeting, Bob, when this gentleman came in by Zoom and was talking to the Hampden Garden Club. This is driving me nuts. Was talking to the Hampden Garden Club about what we would be able to do. It was way too late. And I feel that this meeting is way too late. You're asking us on, what is it, March 21st, for 10 days to put all of this together, to look at your website, which I have gone on, and it's the same as it is here tonight. I cannot see what's on that screen. And when I go on my computer, and I have a very nice monitor, I can't read what's on the screen. It's just too too hard. It's too small to read. So what I'm saying is basically you're asking us for help in doing this, in finding these places that need to be addressed. And we're not being given enough time. We may have the information, but we can't read it. And it isn't because we're not educated, it's just not readable. And that to me is a problem. And I noticed that Hampden Garden Club was on the list of organizations who are involved. And I've also noticed that through this, some of your public meetings were in Holyoke, which is very far removed from us. Our closest city is Springfield, and that's also the closest city to East Long Meadow. I don't understand. I mean, here's all of you people with all of your expertise, and you're not giving us enough to go by. You know all of these things, but we don't. And you're not making it available to us. Now, we can go over and look at those pictures over there, which at least from here do not look very good because the color is terrible, which makes it harder for us to read, to see what we're looking at.
May I?
Can you respond, Mary?
Okay, thank you for that input. So, couple of things. The MVP program, which this project is a second and third component of for the town of Hampden, is an evolving program. These priorities will continue to grow, they'll continue to be expanded on. So we're following a schedule that began probably 2 years ago. So the priorities were originally established back when the town did their MVP planning grant. And that was like 3 years ago. And there was some public ed and outreach associated with that. And that is what prioritized these projects that moved forward into what is now the action grant. And the website's been updated regularly. These are projects that are prioritized today with your comment. Again, the resident who brought up Glendale Road, your comment will be part of that final report. Your comment will be part of the final report. The community will be able to continue to add to this through your annual MVP project updates. So we have a deadline because of the grants, and for the last 18 months, it's been field work working with the town. There were no public meetings in Holyoke. The only thing that happened in Holyoke as part of the grant, we were doing a public ed and outreach that targeted students in Hampden and East Long Meadow, and we brought in the Girls Inc. of the city of Holyoke because we used Holyoke Heritage State Park. That became a base for the students to do their training in. It wasn't a public meeting, it was an invitation for the students, and we provided transportation to those students who wanted to come to Holyoke in order to participate in that. So it was a location, it was not a public meeting. So this isn't the end of the story for Hampden. This is an ongoing story. Climate change and changes that you see in your neighborhoods, changes that you see in weather patterns, priorities are going to change. So the MVP program in the town of Hampden and all other communities will continue to be updated. But your comments are definitely welcome, and
Well,
would be.
one of my other comments was when in the Zoom meeting with the selectmen and the garden club, we were definitely interested in doing something. You're talking about rain gardens, pollinator gardens. That's something that we could get involved in. And we do work, everything, all the money that we make goes back into the town of Hampden. It's all, everything we do is for the town. So that's a project that we may very well consider
So is,
funding.
is Lil here tonight?
Yes, Lil is
Hi, so
here.
Lil, we started a conversation about this. So, yeah, so the expectation is because of timing, we had done some outreach for another location that isn't working out with respect to doing our last BMP workshop. So we talked today after Lil and I had a great conversation about the inability and the timeline of this project for the Garden Club to host a workshop for us. So it would be great, and we chatted about that for the Hampden Club to help us promote what might end up being a virtual workshop where we'll record it, we'll show the various plants, we'll show the various species, and then, that can be promoted through social media, whether it's the town's website, Facebook page.
Well, one of the things that I think could be helpful to getting information out to the town is that the Hampden Garden Club has a plant sale on Memorial Day. And if we had clear instructions about what was happening and how to go about doing your own rain garden or contributing somehow to this project, we would be happy to do that stuff, and we were kind of given short shrift.
Well,
At the
it's unfortunate
selectmen's
because
meeting.
we were working another location and that
Well,
didn't end
yes,
up
it was
happening.
way
We got
too
the short
late. The
shrift. Well,
same this meeting is, it's too late.
right, this
We need more
meeting for the perception might be it's too late, but it's part of a process. This isn't the end of the story. So what happens tonight isn't the conclusion. What happens tonight is establishing that baseline, which will continue to change. Projects will continue to be restructured as a result of both changes in the environment as well as additional public input.
Okay. My other input, I happen to live in a flood zone. I live on Main Street. During the flood of 2005, there were white caps on my lawn, so you can imagine how much water there was. Cars were floating away across the street. There was a lot of water. I would be very happy to have some kind of a rain garden on my property, which has been changed because my neighbor has put in a new septic system and raised the land up. So I would be happy to put in a rain garden there, and I'll bet you some of those people who live on Ridge Road, Mark, you know how when you go up Glendale Heights, there's on the north side, the houses facing south, it's very steep. And most of those are not even properly landscaped. There's just a ton of mulch there. And rain gardens might be a place to put rain gardens to lessen the amount of flow off of that road into Glendale. That's something that I had thought of, but that would be up to you guys because you're the experts.
Tony, this is really the beginning.
Yep.
Um,
But if you're going to
We
put in
need
a
to continue-
culvert, you want to put in something that's going to lessen the water going through the culvert.
Correct, that's the whole concept of the rain garden.
Right.
And having the stormwater absorbed into the ground rather than flowing into the streams
Right.
and causing. But what I want to say is, this is just the beginning. I mean,
Okay.
we could just simply sit back and accept more floods. But this
Please, no.
provides us with a plan and a balanced plan. And the goal now is to reach others in the community, other important groups and individuals, to learn about what we've done here, what we have,
Yep.
and also to try and get funding and do implementation. 2,490 people in Hampden were contacted today by phone and urged to come to the meeting. We publicized it over at the intersection of Wilbraham Road and East Long Meadow with that electronic sign. Every member of every board and every commission was contacted by email and given information about the meeting. But as you can see, it's a challenge to connect with the general public for a variety of reasons. They're busy, they work long hours, all that stuff. So this is not going to end tonight. I see it really as just the beginning
Right.
of an effort to implement constructive changes, both with culverts replacement, as well as the softer infrastructure, try and bring better control of stormwater in the town over a period of several years. So
And the first money for the project that we might get from the state for doing some of these culverts, when would that come? A couple of years?
No,
2
no,
years?
not at all, no. This is an ongoing program. It's adequately funded by the state, and we're going to ask for more. We've already put in a request to do design for the East Main Street Bridge, where there's a
Okay.
culvert as well,
Right,
and where it's a prime source of the flooding in the area.
right. And the
We're going to
bridge is
focus on
falling
that because
apart.
that bridge is safe, but when we inspected it, there's considerable spalling of the concrete. It's an old
Very
bridge,
much, yeah.
and that has to be a priority.
Plus the,
And
it's
Mark
a
is-
nice
Mark is,
looking, but
marked out
it's
areas.
not safe. It's,
Uh,
because today's bridges, I call it prison modern, that they use because it's very closely spaced bars, but it does keep small children from falling into the brook. And there are a lot of kids that go to Laughing Brook, so the bridge itself, I know needs work.
Well,
I was just wondering when this money might start coming in to.
as far as I'm concerned, as soon as we can get it.
Okay. Okay, and I
We were
hope-
on the phone today. Actually, we had a Zoom call this afternoon with Andrew Smith. We thought he would be on tonight. He is the key person at the state agency based in Springfield now, the state office in Springfield, where the funding comes from. He's the one that provided the funding for this effort, and we continue to work with him to help get funding for the kind of needs that we obviously have here.
Okay. And Bob, if you want to reach more people, somehow I got the call, and when I went to play it, it was spam risk. That's not
We're-
something that people,
I know that happens with some of you. That's not our fault. That is a classification that your phone company gives. And we have made the request of Verizon. They claim that they're not doing it. Apparently Spectrum is,
Spectrum.
yes.
Yep, they
So
have a Spectrum.
we're working on that in the last few days as well, because
Thank you.
we have had people comment that when the call comes in, it says spam, and so they don't get the message.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. Thanks for trying to take care of that.
And I apologize for the website. If my email's at the bottom of that comment form, if you want anything sent to you, just let me know. The
At
T
the
Miller.
bottom
Hey.
of,
We have another,
Yeah, it's on the
person.
green form. I can show you afterwards if you want.
okay, yes.
okay.
Oh, and the garden club is still interested if you have materials you'd like us to hand out.
We had a good conversation.
Hi. I have a comment rather than a question, I guess. Yep, I have a comment. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Oh, can you hear me now? All right. Sandy Howell, Glendale Road. I'm Upper Glendale Road. I know exactly what you're talking about when you're talking about that culvert down there that needs to be put in. But I have a question about, we're on the mountain, water flows down, right? And we're talking about planting extra vegetation to hold the water in, whether it's trees, whether it's beautiful vegetation, which you spoke about. How about if we're on the mountain and there's a huge solar farm that wants to go in there and cut down 10 acres of trees. All that water is going to come down the mountain, which we're trying to already protect from coming down the mountain. And I would like to know how everyone feels about that, because I know this sounds self-serving, but I'm really concerned about degradation of the land higher up on Glendale Road, where all those streams come down, Eastbrook. They all come down through there. And if you have 70,000 solar panels and that water's coming down and you're removing 10 acres of trees, which we're just talking about planting trees and vegetation, how are you going to catch all that water? That's all I want to know. I'm not talking about not having the solar panels there. I'm talking about what will be the plan for the catch basin as climate changes for that water coming down the mountain. We're talking less water now coming down, that's a problem. What's going to happen when all that huge waterfall of water comes down the mountain? That's all I'm concerned about. And do we have any plan for that if that happens to go through? Is that a side thought? You all know what I'm talking about here. Is that a side thought to this whole thing, aside from this plan? Do we have a plan to catch all the water?
The project has not been approved.
I know that, but
And I think the point that you're making
yes,
is valid,
it is very valid.
and that certainly when the planning board finally gets to reviewing and approving, they can establish conditions. And it seems to me that this point ought to be made, and that they should establish conditions that so it will not exacerbate flooding situations. So,
Water flows downhill. So,
Can I interject also?
Yeah.
So with solar projects, just like any project, their responsibility is to handle that water on site. Those to be minimized at
Correct.
the property line. So it's not responsibility of the people at the bottom of the hill, water runoff comes from the top of the hill. So it's kind of a function of your zoning regulations, planning board, and permitting process. Make sure that the design of those sites have the proper on-site stormwater treatment. So really the goal is that additional treatment, like what you're talking about, should be occurring on the solar farm property before it gets to the road.
okay, so there would be no particular catch basin. I mean, I'm trying to understand the logics of this whole picture myself.
Not necessarily, it's not the town's responsibility to handle land changes on a private project or any project.
So whatever they do,
They're supposed to be
They
able to
do.
manage and do on-site. There's stormwater regulations that go with
yeah.
combination of planning and zoning regulations. There's also the Massachusetts Department of Environmental
Yeah.
Protection, stormwater plans,
Mhm.
which basically say at the property line after road development, water runoff
Has to be.
should be the same.
Yes.
Or and after the road development.
Well, we had already that problem with that farm there, as you well know. They didn't take care of it, and that gentleman had to go to court because that silt was all running down into Scannick. So I can foresee big issues ahead with that, and I'm glad that, I mean, this is great as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, everybody, for what you're doing, for holding the meeting. It sounds fabulous.
Thank you.
are we all set? So,
Any other questions from the audience or online?
Nope.
apparently not. Okay, well, thank you all for attending tonight. As I said, this continues. It doesn't just end tonight. I hope you have a chance to take a look. We'll certainly try and make the website legible and have a look at the proposals up to now and follow along. We're going to try and get funding as opposed to raising your taxes to implement some of these plans for the benefit of the town and the severe weather which we're having and which we anticipate will continue having. So, okay, thank you. Yeah.
We'll stay after the meeting if anyone wants to look at these boards. These boards we're going to leave with the town. You can contact Bob and he'll tell you where they're going to have.
Yeah,
convert.
do you want me to turn off?
Don't turn the Zoom on.
Want me to stop recording?
It'll convert.
Oh, it'll convert?
Yeah, so we can post it.
Oh, okay. So I just won't
Converts
touch
to
it.
MP4.
Awesome.
Is this yours, Taylor? Municipal Vulnerability Project. It also stands for Most Valuable Player.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I was trying to sign and everything, and it was on my machine, I didn't see it. I never got it.
One of the dilemmas that we have, how soon to do it? If you do it earlier, people forget. If you do it the day of, some people say, why didn't you tell me ahead of time I had plans for dinner tonight?
No, I got it this afternoon.
Yeah, I set it up for 1 o'clock.
And it was.
You need to maybe register your cell phone? You have a cell phone? It did not come through with your landline. It should go to I don't have an explanation for that. The company that we use for those calls has a landline number. We don't give them the landline number. Part of the service we pay for, they have that. The federal government doesn't allow cell phone given out. So if you want to get the message on your cell phone, you have to basically register it. On the town's website, on the front page, scroll down. There's a place where you can register your cell phone. So you'll get it both on your landline and your cell phone.
Fire station meetings. It's been an hour and
I know. That's right. That's right.
They don't do anything.
See those two speakers? I'm waiting for a cable to arrive that will enable us to hook up those two speakers to the system here. So the people in the room will hear what we say out of those speakers. That'll work.
Battery pack.
Well, this has just come up in the last 4 to 6 weeks that the selectmen are mumbling, we can't hear them when you're sitting here. I don't know, I mean, we tell everybody, project your voice, you can do it, but if you don't, people will not be able to hear you. I mean, I had the same response that you did. Chris was good. That's right.
The other gentleman.
I know.
No, I said the same, I said timing is everything, and I. If people know, they can go on the website.
Well, your point's taken. As you can see, we've got them set up. We're waiting for the cable to arrive. You know, it's a supply chain like everything else. Can't get it. As soon as that happens, I hope the next couple of weeks we'll be able to have much better acoustic signal. And people will be able to hear it. Well, no, you asked me about that. You asked me
Yeah, we tried. It wasn't meant to put you